Hello, everyone. I'm Hemvar from Hemvar 2699, and I want to do just another vlog. It's a kind of a story time, which is kind of what they've all been, anyways. Um, I think it's been a few days, and so I was like, let's do another one before I get completely, totally exhausted from my job here in the next few days. So, um, I wanted to talk about growing up in a village or two, technically. So, what I mean by a village is I don't mean a place that has like just a couple houses. I mean a place that's technically designated, like on the census or whatever, as a village. Okay, so it's not a town, it's not a hamlet for that matter, or a thorp. I don't know if that's a thing you can't have in the United States, at least, or it's not a city. Okay, so I lived in two villages, and I lived in villages for almost the first 12 years of my life. I moved um, in December of 2008 down to Florida, and that was. But the two towns I lived in when I lived in Illinois, since that's where I was born, they were technically villages. Okay, and one was much smaller. One you could considerably call a village, and it makes sense. The other one was a little bigger. It's probably something I would call a town, but it was technically a village as well. And these towns were well, these villages rather were nice. I mean, just to put it bluntly, growing up in a village was fine. Okay, um, I enjoyed it. In the first one is it's a place called D-Land, D-Land, Illinois, or DeLand. Um, we called it D-Land, the people who lived there. So um, it was tiny. It was about 400, 500 people there. Um, Not very big at all. As a farming community, of course, there's a grain elevator at the center of town. There's a post office. There was a Carnegie library that my mama was actually the librarian for when I was very young, before she passed away. And there's a little bank, which is now the library, and the Carnegie Library isn't used for anything, as far as I'm aware, which is a waste of a Carnegie Library. But um, and in the school, there was a school in town, but I'm not entirely sure when that went out of use. I'd have to ask my dad, because my dad grew up in this village. Um, and My dad actually lived in that school at one point, but that was never a school when I was growing up there. Um, there was a school that was in the country, um, in a bunch of cornfields, for our village and another neighboring village, Weldon. So I think Weldon and D-Land are actually in different counties. I'm not 100% sure on that, but we share a school. It's out in the middle of the country. And I remember my dad was one of the basketball coaches at that school. We were the Eagles. We, I could be misremembering, but I remember us sucking pretty bad. I think there was a soccer field there, and I remember playing a soccer game there once when I had moved away to the other village. But I lived here until I was about 7. Lived in several different houses. There was one across the house street from my papa, mama's house, and I uh, I fell down the stairs in that house when I was about 2. I don't remember living there. I don't think anyone had lived there anytime I lived in Illinois. Um, from after we moved out of it. At least I don't remember. I think we lived in an apartment at one point. That place again, I don't remember. I have very vague memories of living in one house that my friends later moved into. I had these friends um, that lived in this house. So I lived in one house, and my uncle and my aunt and my cousins lived in the house. The backyards were connected, and then when my aunt and uncle they moved up to Galena, and I guess I technically lived in Galena as well when I lived in Illinois, but that was only for about a month. I don't think Galena is a village, but Galena is beautiful, though. Maybe I'll talk about that sometime. Um, and then I moved out. We moved out of that house, so we went to their house, and then someone else moved in. So I was good friends with the people that moved into the house that we used to live in. I have very few memories of living in that house, though. But I remember getting my first bike. I remember my grandpa, the one who didn't live in town. Papa and grandpa are not the same, but Papa was my dad's dad. Grandpa was my mom's dad. Um, I remember, my grandpa teaching me how to ride my bike there. I remember scraping my knee really bad when I was riding my bike one time. Um, I remember we had a neighbor. His name was Justin Bieber. And so when Justin Bieber became popular, um, there's another story there. I was like Justin Bieber, like that's my neighbor. Anyways, a bunch of different stuff. We had some cats, we had some dogs. I remember one time one of our dogs accidentally killed one of the kittens. I think it was Maggie, our dog. It was a black lab. We had another dog who was a Shih Tzu. Her name was Sable. She was very old. She only had one eye. She was born with one eye, and she was essentially blind in that one eye. So she was pretty grumpy. I remember that. They're probably both long dead at this point, but I remember liking them. The cats were all outside cats. I remember a couple, like Edgar was one of them, and we had a cat named Fitz, I think. Um, and so, yeah, it was a good time. I remember having playing Pokemon cards out on the back deck, digging holes, learning how to swing in that place. It was very rural, though. It was very small. I remember dressing up as a ghost, for one Halloween. That's actually originally what made us move. My parents wanted us to go to a bigger school, and it was a pretty small school. There was only one class for every grade, right? There's one kindergarten class, there's one first grade class, which happens in some places, of course. But I think that was the only place I ever had that. And so they just went to a bigger school. And so I moved to a place called St. Joe or St. Joseph. That's what it is called, but everyone calls it St. Joe. And essentially, this is on the east side of Champaign. D-Land is on the west side of Champaign. The closest, like, bigger, like, actual settlements, Monticello, which is where my half-brother kind of grew up when he wasn't with us. But I then moved to St. Joe, which is where my mom grew up. My mom lived, I think, most of her life in St. Joe. Yeah. Maybe she had lived in Urbana a little bit. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I think she lived most of her life in St. Joe, if not all of it. So St. Joe's another village, but it's a little bigger. It's probably got a couple thousand people. It might be a little bigger than that now. It's now a growing suburb, right, of Champaign-Urbana. It was a good place. I lived there from 7 to 11. I remember we lived in 3 houses there. I lived in this little like apartment place that was on a hill. This hill, and anytime it rained a lot, the bottom of the hill would be flooded. And in fact, the whole street would flood sometimes if it rained enough. It didn't when we lived there, thank goodness. But we got new dogs when we lived there because we weren't allowed to have dogs. That's why we got rid of Maggie and Sable. And so when we moved there, we got a new dog, Ender, after Ender's game. And he's a little Yorkie. It was there that I remember first using YouTube. It was there that I remember first playing RuneScape. I first played RuneScape in like 2004. I think it was there that I first used YouTube. I could be wrong on that. Let's see. I moved in 2008. It might have. It was either there or maybe the next house that I first used YouTube. So YouTube came out in 2005, but I remember we watching like the Illini men's basketball team do well there. I don't think they won though. I think they got second place that year. I remember caring about the men's basketball team, the Illini, fighting the Illini. The school was bigger. It was a bigger school. There was like 3 or 4, I think, classes for each grade. So I second grade there, same teacher my mom had in second grade. Third grade was one of my mom's best friends, was my teacher. Fourth grade, I think was another teacher that my mom knew. Could be misremembering that. It was that teacher that gave me my copy of Castle in the Attic, which is one of the books that helped me fall in love with reading. And then fifth grade, I was a teacher I know my mom had. I don't think it was for fifth grade. It was for some other grade, I think, though. And then sixth grade, I moved in the middle of sixth grade. So fifth and sixth grade were in middle school in Illinois. Sixth grade was the bottom, I believe, of middle school where I moved in Florida. But Overall, there was good times. I remember like going on rides on my bike with my family. There's lots of corn, there's lots of soybeans, um, lots of farming. I remember in the second town I lived in, I in that last house, I remember playing World of Warcraft for the first time, and it was just a demo. We could get to like level 10 or something like that, or maybe it was like timed. I can't remember exactly, but we would just keep on creating characters over and over again. We almost always exclusively made were they night elves, night elf like hunters, because I was just those are the coolest ones. Had a lot of fun with that, um, and I remember one time we were playing that actually, and there was this thing called the Fall Festival they did at the park across the street from our house. They don't do it there anymore. They built a new park. They do it there now. Um, but we had our internet was like running in this cord from this like post that was near our house across the street to the park, and this huge truck comes by with a like a roller coaster type thing on its in its bed, and it's freaking tall, and it hits the cord, and the cord just goes flying down the street, and I lose connection to World of Warcraft. I was like, oh man. So that was funny. But I remember having like some good friends over at that house, and I got another dog at one point. We lived in two houses across the street from that park, actually, at one point. I got another dog, Augie, who only passed away about last year. Um, and there's a lot of good stuff. There's near that, both of those houses, there was a trestle, an old trestle. They used to have the railroad run through town. They had moved it at some point. The railroad had been pulled up. I remember finding like spikes, but it wasn't there anymore. So the trestle, if those don't know, trestle is a bridge for a railroad, right? And there's an old one in town that wasn't used anymore. And I remember like for the longest time there was a dam there till it rained too much and all got washed away. And I just remember going there and having fun, like just like you'd have to step over the missing like these huge little logs that were part of the bridge, and like there's probably it was fun. It was risky, for a kid my age, but probably wasn't really that dangerous as long as I was careful. So yeah, it was fun. I enjoyed it. I don't really talk to any of those people anymore. A lot of my family still lives in smaller towns in central Illinois, um, and I don't visit very often. So I'd like to. I'd like to visit. The last time I was there was 2017, which seems like it was too long ago. But I think one thing is like I grew up in a smaller town. We weren't exactly well off. I wouldn't say we were like what I would call poor, but we were probably in poverty, which I know is the same thing, but stick with me. So, I remember like they emptied the grain elevator out one time, and we had mice everywhere in our house. My dad would just sit there with a BB gun to get the mice, and we had my mouse traps all over the place. And it was a good time. I think you can make of yourself in a lot of ways. I lived in a lot of different places, and so that's kind of resulted in me, right? But it's interesting growing up in such a small place. I didn't graduate from that first school, but my dad did, and he was like one of 11 in his class or something like that. So, anyways, I don't really know what the point is here, but I think the point is that you can make of something what you will. No, I didn't grow up in like an abusive household, and I'm grateful for that. I grew up in a great family. We have our problems, of course, but it was good. And I'm really okay living wherever, essentially at this point. But I think I am more accustomed. I like smaller rather than bigger. Um, that's kind of variable, right, and relative in some ways. Like I live in a small city now, but like 20,000, 25, 30,000 is much better than 100,000 in my opinion. And that might have something to do with the fact that I grew up in these smaller towns. So, but anyways, again, I'm working on the storytelling thing. I need to get better at this. So I'll catch you next time.